Let's look at doing velocity banking on credit cards. A lot of her credit cards are maxed out. Some of them are over the limit and others are very close to being at the limit. First, let's look over the planner. We have the paydays in here. She gets paid $2,500 every 2 weeks. We have all of her cash expenses listed in red. All of her credit cards are here in the purple. And then everything in green is the expenses that can go back onto the cards. Now, always the first thing that you do is you go through and you calculate all of your cash expenses. So the paycheck that she gets on February 28th, she has $2,500. The cash expenses total $1,015. This leaves $985 that we can pay to these credit cards that are due during that paycheck. Now we have to go through and plan which bills will go back on each one of those cards. So this electric bill here will probably go on the Apple Card. The Apple Card is due at the end of the month, which is February 28th, the same day that she gets paid. She can put this electric bill back onto the Apple Card because the Apple Card statement date is the same date as the due date. This is not true with many other credit cards. Most credit cards, there's a couple days between the due date and the statement date when the card's reported to the credit bureau, but the Apple Card, those dates are the same. So you can actually start spending on that card the very next day. I also forgot to mention that we have her credit card statement dates circled here. These are the cards she's probably going to be using at first. So the T-Mobile bill will probably go onto the PayPal card. Its statement probably closes somewhere around the 5th of the month. She also has these miscellaneous spending items here. I would try to do most of this on the same day. That way you keep track of what you're spending. So maybe she could do these around the 12th and the 27th of the month. The 12th would be after one of these cards close here, and the 27th again would be after these 3 cards close. So those expenses could go back on one of these cards. If we add up these monthly expenses and divide them by 2, that's $265 that she can spend each paycheck on gas, food, out to eat, and miscellaneous spending. Then we go in and look at the next paycheck. Some of these bills here are going to have to go on some of the cards that we're paying during the first paycheck, because there's no statement date that's going to close before these bills are due. So those also would probably go on one of these cards here. The internet could go on the Chase card. These 2 Disney bills right here could probably go on this Credit One card. It depends on when it closes. If it closes on the 20th, we could move these to be paid on the 21st, or maybe this card closes on the 19th and we can pay them on the 20th. But oftentimes we can go in and change the due dates if we absolutely need to. But that's how we look at it. We look at the credit cards, we look at the statement dates, and then we look at the bills that are after those statements close and plan to put those bills back onto those cards. This is what that would look like in a list form. The PayPal card, we're paying the T-Mobile. The Capital One, we're paying the car insurance. The Quicksilver, we're paying the Sun Pass and the Netflix. The Venture card we'll use for food, gas, miscellaneous spending. The Credit One we'll use for the Disney Pass and the Disney subscription. The Chase will pay the internet. I would probably use the Financial Bank for the second week of food, gas, and miscellaneous spending. And then the electric bill will go on the Apple Card. This means that every time we pay these other cards here, these balances are going down, and we are not going to use these cards. In the first month, she has 4 cards that are over the credit limit. The Discover card, this Venture card here, the Chase card, and this other Venture card here. So a lot of times when we have cards that are maxed out, if we're paying a large amount to these cards to get them under the limit, we might feel like we're not making a lot of progress the first month, because a lot of these cards that we're putting the spending on will go right back up to the same balance as what we had them at, or very close to it. But the more months we do this, the more it starts to make sense. And once we get these cards paid down below the limits, it'll make a lot more sense. But anyway, this is how it would look in a list form, and we don't use these cards here. The most important thing about doing velocity banking is planning exactly what is going to be spent on each of your cards. And you have to control your spending no matter what method of debt payoff you're using. So this does take a little more planning, but as long as you stick to your numbers, it will work. Another good thing that she has going for her, she has $5,000 in savings. At the moment, I would not have her go in and use any of that to pay off credit card debt until she does velocity banking for a couple months and actually make sure that she's able to see those balances on the cards go down. Then at that point, if she's doing this correctly, she could go in and pay extra to the cards if she wanted to out of the savings. She also has $2,000 coming from taxes that she can pay to the credit cards. We'll go over that in the end of the video. Okay, so let's look at the first paycheck. The cash expenses during this check are the rent, the savings, and the life insurance. So the cash expenses were $1,515. We subtract that from the paycheck. I would try to pay these things, if you can, as soon as you get your check. Go in and get these payments out of your account. Now we have $985 left that we can pay to these cards. Again, remember we planned which bills were going back on each one of those cards already. Remember the Apple Card is usually due at the end of the month, but her paycheck is the last day of the month. So we're gonna add the Apple card in here. The electric bill is $50. This card was one of the cards that was not at the limit. So we're gonna go in and pay $50 to the Apple card. That should be enough to cover the electric bill. The PayPal card, we're paying the T-Mobile bill. The T-Mobile bill is $60. I would pay $100 to that PayPal card. This should cover the T-Mobile bill plus interest, and that balance will go down slightly. The Credit One and Discover cards, we weren't using those. This card was about $210 over the limit. She has less money left over after her first paycheck than her second, so she'll probably have to wait until the second month to get this balance below the limit. So I would pay the minimum on that card, and then I would pay $100 to the Credit One card. The Capital One card, we need to pay the car insurance with. The car insurance is $158. I would pay $210 to the Capital One card. That will cover the car insurance, the interest, and probably, again, have that balance go down slightly. The Quicksilver card, we're gonna pay the Sun Pass and the Netflix. So that's $55 for those. I would pay $110. Again, that's going to cover those two bills, the interest, and probably have that balance go down a small amount. Now this Venture card is over the limit, but it's only slightly over the limit, maybe like $30. So we have the food, gas, and miscellaneous spending going back onto the Venture card. Remember, I said that was going to be $265 per check. I would pay $200 to the Venture card. Now remember, we needed $265 to go back on the card. The first month, we might have to cut back just a little bit on spending, or this could possibly go on another card that is not maxed out. Remember, we were over $30. They're probably going to take about $120 for interest. So we have 200 minus 30 minus 120. So $50 would be all we have to use for the food, gas, and miscellaneous spending. So she would probably have to use one of her other cards over here that are not at the limit for that additional $215 in spending for that first check. Or we could pay a little bit less to some of these cards that we're not going to use to make sure that that amount does fit on this card. There are multiple different options there. Here's another card that we're not going to use. The minimum payment is $140. So let's go through and double check the numbers. 985 minus 50 minus 100 minus 100 minus 75, 210, 110, 200, 140. So we have the balances on 3 cards going down. We've paid all of these bills here, and we're almost able to account for this amount here. Now, paycheck number 2, again, we go through, we find the cash expenses, which are listed in red. For the second paycheck, those are $730. So we have $1,770 left over this time that we can pay down the cards. We have the Disney Pass and the Disney subscription going back on the Credit One card. I would pay $110 to that card to account for those payments, plus a little bit for interest, and maybe the balance will go down slightly. The Chase card, we were going to put the internet back on it. The internet is $110. But remember, the Chase card was one of those cards that was over the limit. So I would pay $300 to the Chase card, and hopefully that will be enough to put the internet back on there, get the balance below the limit, and account for the interest. The Loft card is another one that we're not using. Same with the Express here. I would go in and pay $100 to each one of those. The minimum payments on those are $43 and $60. So the interest charge will eat up some of this $100, but the balance still will probably go down around $50 on both cards. Now we have the Venture card, which was another card that was over the limit, but we're not doing any spending back on that card. I would pay $400 to it, and that should get it under the limit. Now remember, with the cards that are over the limits, we're having to pay large amounts to them the first month to get them back under the limit. Next month, we'll be able to use these amounts here to pay other cards that we're putting bills back on if we wanted to. The American Express card, we're also not putting anything back on it. Its minimum payment is $50. And actually, I think this card was over the limit too. I would pay $110. That card is probably still going to be over the limit, and that would be one that we have to address next month, and we could possibly use some of these funds to do it. Then we have the financial bank. We have to put the food, gas, and miscellaneous back on it, $265. This card balance was around $3,500, and the limit, I believe, was $5,000. I would pay $400 to it. So let's say the balance goes down to $3,100. They're going to charge some interest. Let's say it's around $80. Now we're at $3,180. I just want to explain what we're going to do with the miscellaneous spending and how we keep our spending under control while we're using the credit cards for those items. These items here are really easy to plan, and the amounts don't change. These here, we can very easily overspend. So this is how I prevent that. Okay, so we had the $3,500 to start. We paid $400. They added $80 for interest. Now the balance is at $3,180. we're spending $265 back on the card. $265. Once the balance on that card gets to $3,445, we stop spending and we do not spend anything else on this card. That means we've hit our spending limit, we've hit our budgeted amount for those miscellaneous items. The other way to look at it, a lot of times this balance won't update daily. But what does update daily is your available credit. So if the card has a $5,000 limit and we want to stop spending at the balance of $3,445, when the available credit says $1,555, we are done spending on that card. This is where people get thrown off of their budget, so be very careful of that. This is how I try to prevent it. Okay, so we're paying $400 to this card. That balance is going down. Now it didn't go down a whole lot. It only went down about $55 from where we started, but it will go down some. Now we're at the rooms to go. That's another card we weren't using. The payment on it is $110. I would pay just slightly over that, $150, so the balance goes down a little bit more. And then again, at the end of the month, we're back to the Apple Card, which we know the electric bill is going back on that. Remember, the electric bill was $50. Now this time I would go in and pay $100 to that card. That'll account for the electric bill, the interest, and a little bit extra so that the balance goes down. Remember I said the first month is going to be a little bit difficult because it's going to seem like we paid a lot of money to these cards and a lot of them are still very close to being maxed out. But we got a lot of these cards a couple $100 down to get them below their limit. Remember I said that she had the $5,000 in savings, which we weren't going to touch until we make sure we're successful with this method. But she also has $2,000 that she can pay to the credit card balances. So there's a couple different ways that we could do that. So if we have $2,000 and we have 10 cards, we could just pay $200 to 10 of those cards. We could also take $2,000 and pay $500 to 2 of the lower cards, and then $500 to 2 of the cards with the higher balances. We could pay $500 to the Apple Card and it would be paid off because that is its limit. So with the lower cards, it's going to get the utilization down really low. With the higher cards, it'll knock out a large chunk of the balance. The way that I prefer to do this though is to look at the credit utilization chart, especially if we're working on increasing our credit score. You can do this on paper or you can do it in a spreadsheet. It really doesn't matter. But you look at the card balances, find out where their current utilization is at and what the next goal is to get all of the cards down to a certain percentage. It is okay to heavily focus on 1 or 2 cards. Remember I said her Apple Card, this is wrong, but her Apple Card, her limit was only $500. So she could go in and get that card easily down to 9% with that $2,000. And then maybe one of her cards with the $5,000 limits, she would want to try to get it down to 75%. You want all of your credit card balances to go down some each month if you want to increase your credit score quickly. So I'm going to send her the utilization chart spreadsheet and she can go in and play with the numbers. Maybe with the $2,000, she would be able to get all of the cards to 75% or less. It would just depend on the card balances after we do velocity banking for the first month. So again, multiple different ways that we could use $2,000 to pay down the balances on the credit cards, but the most important thing is that you have your spending under control. And remember to watch out for the food, the gas, the out to eat, and the miscellaneous spending, because those are the places where oftentimes we're going over in our budget. It's not usually our monthly bills that's putting us over. We know how much those are. They stay the same every month for the most part. The miscellaneous spending is where we lose control sometimes. But anyway, this is what it would look like for a month of velocity banking on credit cards that are mostly maxed out or very close to the limit. A lot of times the first month, you're not going to feel like you're making very much progress, but just make sure all of your credit card balances have gone down. That's a sign that you're moving in the right direction. Then every month after that, those balances will start going down more and more and more. We'll be charged less interest, so actually more of our payment is going to go to the balance. We'll also be earning rewards for putting the bills back onto the credit cards. When I am in debt payoff mode, I don't use those points for travel. I turn them in for cash back to make the balances go down even faster. But anyway, I hope this was helpful. And if you have any other questions about velocity banking, credit cards, credit scores, or anything else, let me know.